What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This is Legitical Response. Now, I've been in the business for a little while now of taking the corporate press narrative, fact-checking the corporate press narrative, and notching it down and putting them in their place, if you will, because they're constantly lying to me and you. They're constantly searching for more clicks and more likes. They're more worried about going viral than they are about truth, integrity, facts. They're more worried about the next shocking headline that they can get than they are about holding the government to account, getting to the truth, to the bottom of matters, getting facts to the American people, letting us know, giving us the information. They're more worried about skewing the facts in a certain direction to push a specific narrative that will help one political side and hurt the other political side. They're more worried about their ratings than they are about what they're supposed to be worried about, which is getting the truth out there to the American people. And this has become obviously clear in the last 10 to 15 years. It's been getting more and more and more apparent, and people are starting to wake up and see that. As a matter of fact, the ratings of places like CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC, and Fox have been going down. Now, you might say, oh, well, Fox is right-wing. Yeah, they're still corporate press. It doesn't matter what wing you are. If you're corporate press, you are trying to push a specific narrative that is divorced from reality. And this is blatantly apparent in how they present their news stories, how they ask the questions, how they respond to the answers, and exactly how they present themselves as supposedly bringing the news, right? But they don't really bring the news anymore. They just push, like I said, for the next viral moment, the next click, the next like. That's all they want. That's all they seem to care about. And they've gotten into this nasty habit lately of trying to put politicians and other people into a certain corner to rope them in with anything that's against their narrative. And they seem to do this a whole hell of a lot.
You were the first senator to object
Yeah.
to the votes.
Mm-hmm.
In 2024, will you certify the election results? Do you plan to object, or will you accept the results regardless of who wins the election?
So, Caitlin, I got to say, I think that's actually a ridiculous question.
It's a yes or no question, though.
No, it's not. Let me explain why it's a ridiculous question. It's not a question. You've ever asked a Democrat that?
Of course.
What Democrat?
But what Democrats?
Hold on a second. What Democrats challenge it?
What Democrats? I know. I've been down this road many times.
But
no Democrat. You cannot compare the two situations. We have talked about that. We've seen the audio of that when they protested on the Senate floor.
Hold on a second.
But has you ever had a sitting president who refused to facilitate the peaceful transition of power, refused to acknowledge that his successor won the presidency?
So, we did have a peaceful transfer of power. I was there on January 20th. I was there on the swearing in.
Barely.
That's just great. They love to put out this narrative that, oh, Trump tried to overturn democracy. He didn't allow the peaceful transfer of power, which is absolute BS, because guess what, y'all? Joe Biden is in the White House. He's absolutely wrecked this country. They tried to push that narrative because some people at a rally got out of hand and were fighting with cops and stormed the Capitol, and they tried to destroy democracy when that's not really exactly what happened. Yeah, sure, those people, those rioters that fought with police and was trying to go into the building, sure, that was a very bad thing. But to try to blame that on Republicans all over the place, they try to blame that on Trump because he was responsible for holding that rally. Well, guess what, y'all? He can't be responsible if a couple of idiots get out of hand and start fighting with cops and try to go into the building and do all this other BS. That's not his fault. And asking the question, will you accept the results of the election, like Cruz said, it's a very ridiculous question for the simple fact that it doesn't really matter if they accept the results or not. Democracy is going to play out how democracy is going to play out. The results are going to go through regardless of who wins. There's not going to be not a peaceful transfer of power, for goodness sakes. Sorry for the double negative, but that's the only way I could seem to put it. But they act like Donald Trump was trying to end the world, for goodness sakes. And he's totally correct. They don't ask Democrats this question because we have a slew of Democrats who have absolutely not accepted the results of the election. Stacey Abrams, Joe Biden back in the day. Democrats and Republicans both alike will refuse to accept the election, or they'll say it was stolen or this and that other stuff, and it really doesn't matter because the peaceful transfer of power is going to happen regardless if they accept it or not. So it's an absolutely ridiculous question. And once again, it's the bringers of truth, it's the fact portrayers that are actually pushing the narrative in this certain direction, only asking Republicans this question to try to put Republicans into a box to say, oh, he refused to answer the question about if he would accept the results of the election. But they don't do that to Democrats. And once again, it doesn't matter if they accept them or not. The peaceful transfer of power is going to happen anyway, but they will continue to push this narrative.
B, if you look at in 2000, Democrats went to the Senate, or 2001, Democrats went to the Senate floor and objected to George W. Bush. In 2004, they went and objected.
And what did the president do?
In 2016, Democrats went and objected to Donald Trump. And so... Look,
and what happened in 2016? Because I remember a guy named Joe Biden was vice president, and he went to the Senate floor and certified the votes.
So do you want...
Am I wrong?
So you're asking...
Miss Caitlin Collins, what exactly happened in 2020? Didn't Mike Pence go to the House floor and certify the votes? Yes, as a matter of fact, he did do that. And it's funny, too. Notice what she does. She states a fact and then says, am I wrong? Like, no, of course you're not wrong. But at the same time, what are you trying to argue here? What exactly are you trying to say? Am I wrong? What do you mean by that? Because, once again, Mike Pence did the exact same thing in 2020. If you're insinuating that that didn't happen, prove me wrong that Mike Pence didn't certify that election. Just saying.
Will you promise, no matter what, to agree an election is illegitimate regardless of what happens? And that would be an absurd thing to claim. Like, we have an entire election law system that people challenge elections. Elections get overturned. Voter fraud gets proven. That happens all the time. And the media engages in this weird game post-Donald Trump that you insist no voter fraud has ever existed. Why does every state have laws in place to challenge voter fraud if it occurs?
The media
Why do you have election challenges?
This isn't a game. There was no widespread voter fraud.
You only ask Republicans that.
Because it was Republicans who tried to block the transition of power. You have to acknowledge that. So we've never seen it on a scale of what happened in 2020, and we've never seen the president refuse. He wouldn't even let Joe Biden get classified briefings at the beginning. I recall that. So my question for you again, free and fair election, will you accept the results regardless of who wins?
And that's where the lie comes in. There was no legitimate effort to block the transfer of power. There were some bumbling dotards outside of the building that were fighting with police and doing all this dumb shit that obviously Donald Trump didn't want because he told them to be peaceful. Obviously, we didn't want this because the optics of it looked terrible. The optics don't look good for anybody. That's why a whole hell of a lot of people think that was Antifa that was instigating January 6th and not Republicans. However, we can't prove that either way. We don't know that. Sure, people get out of hand. We just went through a damn summer of Antifa and BLM rioting all across the damn country. People were pissed. And then we get up there and lose the election because of the shadow campaign, because Democrats sent a whole bunch of Democrat activists out to go and get pieces of paper from Democrats. And they just left Republicans out of that game. That's why there's so much contention around that election. There was no way in Republicans' minds that the Democrats could win. People liked Donald Trump. Most of the country voted for Donald Trump. And the fact that Joe Biden got 81 million votes, a lot of people that didn't know about the shadow campaign, because nobody knew about the shadow campaign, looked at the results of the previous election where they saw 62 million people voted for Donald Trump, 65 million people voted for Hillary Clinton, and now all of a sudden we have 76 million people voting for Donald Trump and 81 million people voting for Joe Biden. What do you think they're going to think? Yeah, that's a major disparity in the number of voters that went out to go and vote. So what do you think these people are going to think that don't know that the Democrats sent an army of activists out to go and get Democrats to vote by mail? That's why they were so shocked when, hang on, Trump is winning here, and then all of a sudden, all these votes come in for Joe Biden. All those mail-in ballots came in, and they started counting those, and then they started certifying all those, and they all went in all at one time. It looked very suspicious. It looked suspicious as hell, and I understand totally why people still, till this day, believe that Democrats cheated, that Democrats actively engaged in a widespread voter fraud campaign when it wasn't really voter fraud, was it? No. Some people may call it voter fraud because that's a very underhanded thing to do, to get Democrat activists to go to registered Democrats and make sure they fill out their mail-in ballot and turn it in and mail it off, right? That's very underhanded. Some people would call that voter fraud. But the fact that a lot of those cases of voter fraud that Donald Trump brought were turned away upon standing, said they had no standing to bring this case. Hang on. I think personally, anytime there's any fraud in any election, it needs to be investigated. All of the ballots that may have been fraudulent, everything needs to be recounted, in my opinion. Are we ever going to do that? Probably not, because that's a ridiculous number of ballots to recount. That would take a very long time. But do you want to have an honest and fair election? Yes, you need to eliminate voter fraud. But I think Republicans need to get over the fact that, yeah, we lost in 2020 because we were outsmarted by Democrats. Yeah, I'm willing to admit that. Outright. I've read the news article. I've read the shadow campaign. By the way, I put out a video on that in case you haven't seen it. Go by and check that out. It explains everything in pretty good detail, I believe.
Look, if the Democrats win, I will accept the result, but I'm not going to ignore fraud regardless of what happens.
But was there fraud in 2020?
Of course there was fraud in 2020.
No, there wasn't, and you still objected.
You know for a fact there was zero voter fraud. Really? What's your basis for that? Show me your evidence.
We've spoken with Governor Kemp. They did 3 hand recounts in the state of Georgia. The director of CISA said that it was the safest, most legitimate election.
But you're saying zero voter fraud occurred. That's what you just said.
Nothing that would have changed the outcome of that election.
Okay, but that's a different statement.
But no, it's not. Because if
yes,
it wouldn't have changed
you said there was no voter fraud.
There was no voter fraud that would have changed the outcome of the election, and you know that, Senator.
So what I know is that what I stood on the Senate floor and objected, what I called for, I'll tell you, I wrestled with what to do in that circumstance. And the reason I wrestled with it is because I think there was significant voter fraud in 2020. And
you wanted the 10-day commission, I know, but was there voter fraud that would have changed the outcome of the election? But do you know why I wanted a 10-day
commission? Because I tried to look, I'm a Supreme Court litigator. I argue cases in front of the Supreme Court.
I know.
I tried to look through history and precedent, and the best precedent I could find was the election of 1876. 1876 was between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. And what happened there were serious allegations of voter fraud, and Congress didn't throw its hands up and say, you know what? CNN demanded that I accept the results no matter what, so ignore the fraud. I got to go. But hold on. What did Congress do in 1876?
How did the president handle it?
What did Congress do in 1876?
Senator, I have to know, you can't answer yes or no to this question.
I'm asking a question.
That's funny. She asked the question, was there enough voter fraud to overturn the 2020 election? If you go and look at all the rule changes, the fact that Pennsylvania changed their election rules without the approval of the state legislature, which is the basis as for why the Supreme Court case, Texas versus Pennsylvania, was just turned down upon standing. They didn't even look at the freaking evidence. Yeah. I would submit to you that, yeah, there was definitely some fraud going on. Changing the election rules without the approval of the state legislature is fraudulent, if you will. Sure, the votes may have not have been fraud, but you can't just go changing the rules like that. And they did all this just before the election, right when all these mail-in ballots were starting to come in and come out. They changed a lot of rules around elections, and it wasn't just in Pennsylvania. It was all across the country. As a matter of fact, that shadow campaign, like I said, explains how they changed rules and laws in all 50 states, for goodness sakes. They had lawyers, all kinds of people working behind the scenes to win the election. The Democrats completely abandoned trying to win the argument. They didn't care about that. That's why Joe Biden campaigned from his freaking basement, for goodness sakes. They knew that they had this organization put together.
We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics.
They knew that they were going to get enough Democrat activists out there to get as many pieces of paper as they could. They knew for a fact that they were going to win. That's why they weren't worried about it. That's why they weren't worried about winning the argument, about Joe Biden campaigning. But I tell you, they're a lot more worried now than they ever have been.
What did Congress do in 1876?
You can't answer yes or no to this question. Republicans,
can you answer my question? Why are you refusing to answer my question?
I'm conducting the interview with all due respect, Senator. And let me ask you, it's Republicans have twisted themselves in knots. It's just a yes or no question.
I'm not twisting myself. I'm answering your question. You just don't like my answer.
And what's your answer? Is it yes or is it no?
So in 1876, what Congress did is it appointed an election commission. It consisted of 15 people. 5 House members, 5 senators, 5 Supreme Court justices. The Election Commission was charged with studying the evidence and making a determination of what voter fraud occurred, and that determined the winner. And what I called for in 2020 was to do the same thing, appoint an election commission, and 11 senators joined me.
Senator, with all due respect, after it had been thrown out of many courts, after the Attorney General Bill Barr, because there was no basis for those court cases.
No, so that's actually
Senator,
not.
With all due respect,
you asked me a question. Do you want me to answer it?
And you didn't answer the question.
Yes, I did.
Court cases were thrown out.
Hold on a second.
The Attorney General said there was no widespread fraud. You're not clearly answering the question. I want to thank you for that.
I'm answering every question. I think the country would have been a lot better off with a determination of what evidence of voter fraud there was that occurred, and instead the media didn't want to hear it and insists voter fraud never occurs. You ought to go back and look at the Carter Baker Commission.
It was the Attorney General, and my question was about 2024.
It was the media. It was CNN that relentlessly pushed that propaganda. And by the way,
never propaganda? That there was no widespread fraud in the election?
That voter fraud doesn't exist, and anyone who says it does is wearing a tinfoil hat.
And that's where their narrative falls apart. They get called a propagandist. All of a sudden, they get butthurt and don't want to talk about it no more. All Ted Cruz, like he was saying, all he wanted to do was put together a commission just like they did in 1876. Like he said, I went and looked that up. There was a lot of voter fraud in that election, and that's what they did. And that's what we should have done, for goodness sakes. They would have saw that all these rule changes, some of them illegitimate, some of them were legitimate rule changes, right? But they would have saw that getting all those Democrat activists out there to go do this may have been legal at the time. But I can promise you, after that, they would have changed that rule because that's very underhanded. It's called cheating, by the way. Yeah, that's not fair to the other side for Democrats to only go to Democrat residences and get pieces of paper and not go to Republicans. That's not very fair at all. That's skewing an election in a certain way. And by saying that, it was the most free and fair election that we've ever had is absolute propaganda, because it wasn't. There's always fraud in every single election. As a matter of fact, there have been a litany of court cases since then of finding voter fraud, overturning elections, and all this other BS because of what the Democrats did in 2020. But the corporate press doesn't care about facts. They don't care about the rule of law, for goodness sakes. They only care about pushing a narrative, getting a viral click, getting a viral headline that says Ted Cruz refuses to accept the results of the 2024 election, when that's not what he said at all. It's a dumb question, if you ask me. It's an intellectually dishonest question, and it should not be posed to anybody for any reason, for goodness sakes, because the fact that they ask that question in the first place is outright ridiculous. Like I stated earlier, it doesn't matter if they accept it or not. They're going to have to certify whatever election, whatever the outcome is. Asking them that is just childish, in my opinion. But I want y'all to let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section. That's all I got for this one, y'all. I want to thank everybody for watching, and y'all try to have a good day and stay legitical. Peace.